Hello and welcome to the Art Hoard. So today we're reaching to the Hoard to talk about some of my favorite pens, the Pilot Precise V5 series. You've probably seen them around. They're pretty easy to get both online and in-store here in the US, and today we're talking about two of its body types. It has a bit more to the line, but we're going to focus on these guys today. So let's get going. To start off, we're going to be talking about the standard or capped version of the pen. It's a nice little pen. Nice solid body, cap comes off pretty easily but fits snugly. The V5 referring to the tip here, it's 5mm ballpoint, often called extra fine here in the US. So right where the grip is, we have an ink level, sort of ink indicator, about 3/4 of the way through, and that black bit on the side is just for aesthetics. It writes nicely, nice solid little pen. The major downside is that it is in fact one piece, so it's not refillable, and also if something breaks, that's it, pen's done. So this is its partner pen, the Pilot Precise V5 RT. RT standing for retractable. This is definitely my preferred type of pen. I tend to lose pen caps pretty easily. This is a brand new one. You can see it still has its protective little bit on the tip there, the tip being another 5mm. I believe it's the same as the capped version. Now here is one that's been used for a while. It's still in pretty good condition. So you can see it stays nice and clean, doesn't get bent. Very nice. So the thing that I really prefer about this pen over the capped version is actually the fact that it comes apart. This is 3 separate pieces, so it's the top and bottom, so the body splits in 2, and then we have this central cartridge here. This particular refill is interesting since you can see that the actual pen tip is part of the refill. So every time you refill the ink, you're also replacing the tip. So it keeps everything feeling nice and consistent. So the back here is also molded to fit specifically into this pen body. It does mean it's proprietary, you can't use any general cartridges, but the part number is directly on the piece and it's pretty easy to find. Let's take a quick look at these separate body pieces. The head of the pen is all one piece. It screws into the rest of the body with this nice threading. I've owned quite a few of these and the threading's held up pretty nicely in all of them. There's no removable spring. It is manufactured in there. The top and the grip are also all manufactured as one piece. The grip's really glued on there, so if you ever need to replace it, it's gonna be pretty tough. They hold up pretty well. The one on the right is brand new, one on the left is well used. They're a bit scuffed, not too bad. This top half, the clicker bit, is also very solidly attached. It's definitely manufactured to all act as one piece. Moves freely and has no resistance as all the action comes from the spring and the tip of the pen. I've never had one of these fail on me even when I stress click it. So we have this nice metal clip here. It has pretty good tension, so no matter what you put it on, it's probably going to stick around. It won't go anything too thick though unless you bend the metal. Here is kind of showing off that spring piece attached in there. If you don't like the action, you're kind of out of luck. I don't know how easy it is to mod this, but since the spring is really manufactured in there, it's going to be pretty tough. Now that we have everything apart, let's put it back together really quick. You can see, since it is so few pieces, it does come together really nicely and quickly. They refill really fast. It really takes just a few seconds to kind of screw it open, swap out the ink, and then, of course, screw it back together. Easy to do, not a lot to lose, especially if you move around with your pens a lot. So I do want to touch on this really quick. So we have our standard body here. We also have this special edition body. This particular one that I'm going to pull up here is very colorful. It's probably one of my favorites. It doesn't really leave my pen case very often. The rest of the pen body is the same, the action's the same, and the refill's the same. I've actually refilled this one several times now. So you don't really have to worry about whether or not your pen pieces are compatible with each other. But if you do want to get something that's a little nicer, a little fancier, you're all there. So enough of that. Let's take a nice close zoom in on these tips. So here we have the brand new one and the one I've used quite a bit. You can see the protective plastic bead is still on the tip of this new cartridge here. Easy to remove, it's just a little bead of plastic, and that little fuzz that gets left behind, that'll come off easily once you start writing. You can see just how little difference there is between the brand new cartridge on the right and the used one on the left. Since these cartridges come with the tips, they don't really get a ton of wear and tear, which is nice for giving you a nice consistent line and preventing a lot of buildup, but it does stink for, you know, wastefulness. So now that we've taken a nice good look at all the different parts, let's put all these pens back together and see them in action. Alright, so here we have some nice standard white printer paper with some lines printed on it. 24-pound copy paper for your paper nerds out there. We're going to start out with the capped version. The tips between the two body types are pretty identical as far as I can tell. The ink for the capped version does feel a little bit thicker, so it might be different. So the clip is sped up, but I hope you can get a good idea of how nicely this does write. Just a really nice feeling pen, nice and smooth, and no matter how I write with it, it tends to just write really nicely. Alright, so let's do some quicker movements. Oh, hi Bing. Okay. Anyway, as I was saying, I hope you can get a good idea of just how nicely this pen writes, even when you have really quick and sharp movements. There is no skipping. The line works really well, it pulls very nicely and consistently. Writing, drawing, whatever you're using the pen for, you really don't have to think about it. Even doing these tight spirals, there's no skipping, which is really lovely, and part of the reason why I enjoy this pen so much. So let's pull in closer so you can really see how well this writes. So as I pull these strokes up, you can see there's very little bleed or feathering on the edges of that line, just nice and crisp. So this is something to note. If you layer the ink at all as you're writing, it does increase the drying time quite a lot. If you look closely as I make these dots, you can see the ink pool. That little bit of reflectiveness is the ink remaining wet and taking a little bit of time to dry. You can see here as I make these dots that I can smudge them, especially right after, versus when I do a line more closely to a stroke that you would do in writing, it really doesn't smudge, but you do want to be mindful if you tend to hesitate a lot as you write. I've noticed that the pen ink in general works very well as far as dry time goes, but it does reactivate very easily with even just a little bit of moisture. So we have some notes here, very important notes as you can see with both the body types, and we're going to introduce a really standard highlighter, and you can see smudges and looks terrible and gross. So if you're someone who really needs to highlight a lot or enjoys highlighting their notes a lot, I would be careful and kind of experiment if you choose to use this pen for something important. Alright, so with all this you might be thinking to yourself, I really don't write on printer paper very often. Don't worry, I got you. Here we have a really standard notebook that I picked up when I was working an office job. Lined paper, nothing crazy, nothing special, but it also isn't poor quality either. Once again, they write really well, really crisp notes, but this will highlight one of the other major weaknesses of this pen series. As we flip this page, you can see that while nothing bled through onto the page behind it, there is really heavy shadowing on the other side of the page. You can even see some pooling from just how I tend to write. So even though I do write pretty fast without a ton of hesitation, there is a good amount of shadowing with this pen. I know this used to irritate me a ton when I was taking notes in college, so this might not be the pen for you if you're a heavy note taker and you really like to be able to read your notes back to yourself. I find it very distracting. But thankfully, the ink, since it is so dark, you can still read it, but it's definitely not an ideal situation. My handwriting tends to be pretty loopy and dense though, so your mileage may vary with this issue. Let's try some other paper. Here we have a pretty standard notebook that you can find. It's a Moleskin, very popular, and for good reason. These are nice little notebooks and they have nice paper in them. So this is the dot journal version, often used for bullet journaling, which this pen I think is great for. I use it in my bullet journal all the time. It's very easy to keep the pen with the notebook, which is nice. But once again, I really don't highlight with it. So if highlighting is something that you use a lot in your bullet journal, this might not be the right pen type for you. But as we write here, just nice clean writing, which is probably what's most important to me. But even with this nice thicker Moleskin paper, we have a pretty similar issue with the shadowing. I find it less noticeable on the Moleskin than on the lined paper, but it's going to depend on how much that's important to you. So if this pen isn't great with writing, then what is this great for? Well, honestly, I use this pen mostly in art. So here we have 2 art papers, pretty standard 100-pound bristlepboard paper. You can see nice and thick, so there's no shadowing at all, and the ink remains nice and crisp. And let's go over here to the watercolor paper. This is cold press watercolor paper. It's about 140 pounds. No bleeding, no shadowing. So really these pens are kind of my sketchbook daily drivers. For all of our multimedia people out there, we are going to do a water test. And I mentioned earlier that these inks reactivate really easily with water. And you can really see here just how much they just immediately pools and pulls away from where it was placed, which can be a cool effect if you're trying to do some ink work, but it is quite irritating if you're trying to maintain those nice crisp lines, especially with watercolor. So you can see here the ink itself, even though it's a black ink, it does pull blue on the retractable side. The capped one does seem to maintain more of a neutral gray tone. I'm not sure how much of this is truly a different ink or if it's just a happenstance of these particular pens. Alright, last but not least, I mentioned earlier that this pen tends to be my daily driver when it comes to doing sketchbook work, and this is really why. Even though it has a solid metal tip, I find it's really easy to get a bunch of different kinds of lines very quickly with this pen, with just variation in pressure and how you hold it. That is consistent line quality, and the fact that from the beginning of the pen to the end of the pen, it just works. I never have to think about it. I can just throw it in my bag, throw it in my pen case, and I don't have to worry about whether or not my pen is going to perform for me when I want it to. Finally, I'm just going to erase those pencil lines out from underneath, and here you can see that no matter how aggressively I erase, if I lift, if I rub, the pen lines remain nice, crisp, and dark. Definitely my favorite pen for using in the sketchbook. Alright, that's the end of this saga. Overall, just a nice, reliable pen. While I definitely prefer the retractable over the capped version, they're really just great little pens, especially since it's so easy to find and pretty affordable. You really can't go wrong with something like this. Alright, that's enough out of me. These guys are going to go back to the Hoard. So I hope you guys enjoyed your time here, and if you liked it, why don't you subscribe, and maybe we'll see you again. Bye!